My wife said, "It wasn't my job to meet your needs, so I followed her rules, pulled back effort, and made our broken marriage finally turn equal." My wife, Olivia, looked me dead in the eye and said, "It's not my duty to fulfill your desires." In that moment, 7 years of marriage shattered, and I knew everything was about to change, one way or another. The air in our Boston living room that Tuesday night felt thick with unspoken resentments. I was exhausted, hoping for comfort, and instead, received a cold, brutal truth. Honestly, I'm not even sure if what we have now is the same relationship, or something entirely different. But understanding how we got here matters more than you'd think. This isn't your typical marriage advice story where everyone just learns to communicate better. 7 years in, I genuinely thought Olivia and I had something solid. We met in college, dated for 3 years, then married. Those first few years as husband and wife felt like the perfect partnership. I worked as a project manager, she was in marketing, and we had this easy rhythm. We both contributed, split chores, and actually enjoyed spending time together. But around year 5, things shifted. It wasn't a dramatic explosion, more like a slow fade where the person you married starts becoming someone you just live with. The changes were gradual, making them hard to see as a pattern until I was completely immersed. Olivia stopped initiating anything, date nights, physical intimacy, even asking about my day. I'd come home and find her glued to her phone, scrolling through social media. When I tried to engage, I'd get one-word responses, making it clear she wasn't present. At first, I figured she was stressed with work, so I picked up the slack. I did more around the house, cooked most nights, handled groceries, car maintenance, anything to ease her burden. I thought if I just reduced her stress, we'd get back to normal. But here's the thing about trying to fix a relationship by yourself: you end up building resentment while the other person builds entitlement. For 7 years, every single morning, I made her coffee exactly how she liked it: oat milk, half a pump of vanilla syrup. I'd bring it to her while she got ready. It was a small ritual, my way of showing I cared. For years, she'd smile, kiss my cheek, and say thanks. But over the past year, the thank you disappeared, then the kiss, until eventually, she'd just take the cup without even looking up from her phone. When I planned date nights, she'd agree, but spend half the evening checking messages. Weekend trips? Too tired. Affection? She'd tolerate it for 30 seconds before finding a reason to move away. Our bedroom became almost non-existent. And I'm not just talking about physical intimacy, which had dwindled to maybe once every 6 weeks if I was lucky. I mean the complete absence of any romantic connection. We'd go to bed at different times, she'd face away, and in the morning, she'd be up and out before I even woke. I tried talking to her, multiple times. Was something wrong? Had I done something? Was there anything she wanted to share? Each time, the same answer: she was fine, just busy with work, just tired, just not in the mood. After a while, you stop asking. The rejection starts to hurt more than the silence. What truly got to me wasn't just the lack of attention, it was the complete absence of reciprocity. I was still doing all the things: coffee, planning weekends, bills, food, checking in. But she'd stopped doing anything for me. Not because she couldn't, but because she just didn't think about it anymore. I'd mention a big presentation, and she'd forget to ask how it went. I'd tell her I wasn't feeling well, and she'd say, "That's rough," before going back to her phone. I'd cook dinner, she'd eat it without comment, then leave her dishes for me. It felt like I'd become her personal assistant, not her husband. My purpose was to make her life comfortable, while she gave nothing back. The breaking point came that Tuesday night in October. I remember the exact date because it was when everything I knew about my marriage flipped. I'd had a brutal day at work, 9 hours of putting out fires. All I wanted was some basic human connection. Maybe a hug, someone asking if I was okay. I walked through the door around 7:30, utterly exhausted, and found her on the couch, in the same position she'd probably been in since she got home. Scrolling. TV on in the background. I sat down, tried to decompress, talking about my day, the client issue. She just kept scrolling. Her eyes never left the screen. She was on Instagram, TikTok, whatever, double tapping and swiping while I was pouring my heart out about something stressing me deeply. After about 5 minutes of talking to essentially nobody, I stopped mid-sentence. I just sat in silence, waiting to see if she'd even notice. She didn't. Another 3 minutes passed before I finally said her name. She looked up, annoyed, like I'd interrupted something crucial. I told her I felt like a roommate, not a husband. That we hadn't had a real conversation in weeks, that I couldn't remember the last time she'd shown any interest in my life. I wasn't angry, just honest. Just tired of pretending. And that's when she said the words that changed everything. She looked at me with this completely flat expression, no emotion, no warmth, nothing. It's not my duty to fulfill your desires. I'm not your entertainment. The way she said it, so casual, so matter-of-fact, like she'd been thinking it for a while and was just now bothering to tell me. It wasn't even said in anger, which somehow made it worse. It was a cold statement of fact, like informing me of a policy change. I sat there stunned, trying to process it. Surely, she didn't mean it the way it sounded. But when I looked at her face, waiting for her to soften it or explain, she just went back to her phone. That's when it hit me. She absolutely meant every word. In her mind, she had zero obligation to consider my needs, my feelings, or my happiness. I was just this person who lived in the same house and occasionally bothered her. Something shifted in me right then. Not anger, exactly, but this crystal clear understanding. I'd been playing a game where only I knew the rules. I'd assumed marriage meant partnership, that we cared about each other's well-being, that making your spouse happy was something you did because you loved them. But she just told me, as directly as possible, that none of that applied to her. She didn't owe me anything. Not her time, not her attention, not her affection. Nothing. So, I decided right there, sitting on that couch while she scrolled, that if those were the rules she wanted to play by, then those were the rules we'd both play by. If it wasn't her duty to fulfill my desires, then it sure as hell wasn't my duty to fulfill hers. If she didn't owe me her attention, I didn't owe her mine. If she wasn't my entertainment, I wasn't her servant. Fair is fair, right? The next morning, I didn't make her coffee. For the first time in 7 years, I made myself a cup, drank it, and left for work. When I got home that evening, I didn't ask about her day, didn't cook dinner for both of us. I made myself a sandwich and ate it while reading on my phone. She looked confused, glancing at me like she was waiting for me to snap out of it. But I just treated her exactly how she'd been treating me. And honestly, for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. What Olivia didn't understand when she told me it wasn't her duty to fulfill my desires was that I'd been running our entire household assuming we were a team. The moment she declared we weren't, everything I'd been doing for her became optional. The first week of living by her rules was almost liberating. Like I'd been carrying this massive weight for years, and suddenly someone told me I could put it down. No more guessing what she needed. No more planning things she wouldn't appreciate. No more bending over backward for someone who wouldn't even look up from her phone. She noticed the coffee thing first, obviously. Its absence was immediate. The first day, she came into the kitchen while I was finishing mine, just standing there, clearly waiting. I rinsed my cup, grabbed my keys, and told her I was heading to work. She asked if I forgot something. I said, nope. I had everything I needed. The look on her face was priceless, a mix of confusion and disbelief, like I'd surely fix it tomorrow. But tomorrow came, and so did the next day. Each morning, I made exactly 1 cup of coffee. The meals were next. I'd been cooking dinner 5 nights a week, always enough for both, cleaning up while she went back to whatever. Now, I made food for myself, a portion for one, and ate it whenever. Sometimes 6, sometimes 8. Didn't matter. She'd come home expecting dinner, and instead, find me eating or already done, with no extra portions waiting. The first few times, she'd ask what we were having, and I'd tell her what I had, past tense. She'd just stand there, processing that I wasn't including her. After about 10 days, she started trying to communicate her needs, but indirectly. She wouldn't ask, just make comments meant to prompt me into action. I'm hungry. The house is getting messy. We haven't done anything fun in a while. These little hints used to make me jump. Now, I'd just acknowledge them and move on. That's rough. You should eat something. The living room needs vacuuming? You're right. Bored? You should find something to do. The really interesting part was watching her try to figure out what was happening. She'd get frustrated, asking why I wasn't doing things I normally did. I'd use her exact words back at her. I'm just not feeling it right now. Or, that sounds like something you can handle yourself. The first time I said it wasn't my duty to fulfill her desires, she actually flinched, like hearing her own logic reflected back physically hurt. But she couldn't argue. What was she going to say? That I was wrong for treating her the way she treated me? About 3 weeks into this new arrangement, she got sick with a bad cold. Nothing serious, but enough to make her miserable. The old me would have been all over it, soup, medicine, fluffing pillows. Instead, I told her there was cold medicine in the bathroom cabinet and kept working on my laptop. She called from the bedroom, asking for water and tissues. I told her I was in the middle of something, but she knew where we kept both. I could hear the genuine shock in her silence. Later that evening, she dragged herself out to the living room, looking absolutely pathetic, wrapped in a blanket, red eyes, box of tissues. Clearly hoping the visual would guilt me into caretaker mode. She sat on the couch next to me and said she felt awful, really emphasizing how sick she was. I nodded sympathetically and said, "That's unfortunate." She waited for more. For me to ask what she needed, or offer something. When I just went back to watching TV, she actually said, "Aren't you going to take care of me?" I looked at her, completely calm, and told her I wasn't really in the mood to go out of my way tonight. That it sounded like her problem to solve. The look of betrayal on her face was something I'll never forget. This moment where she realized I meant every word and wasn't going to cave. Her birthday came about a month into this experiment, and that's when things really escalated. For our entire relationship, I'd always made a big deal out of it, surprise parties, special dinners, thoughtful gifts. This year, the day came and went like any other Tuesday. I said happy birthday when I saw her in the morning, in the same tone I'd used to comment on the weather. And that was it. No gift, no plans, no cake. She kept dropping hints all day via text. Can't believe I'm another year older, wonder what today will bring? I'd respond with generic stuff like, time flies, or hope you have a good one. When she got home, she walked through the apartment, clearly expecting something, looking for decorations or hidden presents. Instead, she found me on the couch reading. The disappointment on her face was so intense, it was almost cartoonish. She stood there for a solid minute before asking if we were doing anything for her birthday. I looked up from my book and said, "Oh, did you want to do something? I'm pretty tired from work, so I'm just going to stay in, but you should definitely do whatever you want." She actually teared up, said this was her birthday and it mattered to her. I shrugged and told her that was nice, but I just wasn't feeling up to making a big production out of it. That's when the manipulation tactics started coming out in full force. She cried, which normally would have destroyed me, but I'd cried plenty of times when she ignored my needs, and it hadn't moved her. She accused me of being cruel, of punishing her, of not loving her anymore. Every emotional appeal she could think of. I stayed completely neutral, explaining I wasn't punishing anyone, just living by the same rules she'd established. If her needs and desires weren't my responsibility, then mine weren't hers. When the emotional manipulation didn't work, she tried to bring in reinforcements. Her sister, Sophia, came over for what was clearly a planned intervention, cornering. Me in my own living room. She explained how I was being unreasonable and hurtful. I listened politely, then asked if she'd heard what Olivia told me that started all this, about how it wasn't her duty to fulfill my desires. Sophia stumbled over that one, tried to say that was different. I asked her to explain how. She couldn't, because there wasn't a difference. Eventually, she left looking uncomfortable. Olivia's mom, Eleanor, tried next, calling me for a concerned talk about how her daughter was so unhappy and confused. I explained the whole situation, told her exactly what Olivia had said to me, and how I was simply matching that energy. Eleanor got quiet for a long time before saying maybe they both needed to think about things, which was not the response Olivia had been hoping for. The financial situation brought everything to a head. We'd always had shared finances. Lately, Olivia had been making larger purchases without discussing them. So, I opened a separate account and started having my paycheck deposited there, only transferring my half of the bills to the shared account. When she noticed and asked what I was doing, I explained I was managing my own finances now, same as she managed hers. If she wanted to buy things, she should use her own money. The panic that crossed her face was immediate and real. Suddenly, she was looking at her actual income without my subsidizing her lifestyle. She realized she couldn't maintain our apartment in Boston, the car, or the spending habits she'd developed. She tried one last power play, probably thinking it would snap me back. She looked me dead in the eye and asked, maybe we should just get divorced? Not as a real question, but as a threat, expecting me to panic, beg her to stay. Instead, I thought about it for maybe 3 seconds and said, okay, that sounds fine. We can start that process whenever you want. The color drained from her face. She played her trump card, expecting me to fold, and I'd called her bluff. Now she had no idea what to do. She packed a bag 2 days after I agreed to the divorce, said she needed space to think, and went to stay with Sophia across town. I could tell she expected me to stop her, to have some big emotional moment where I admitted I'd been wrong and begged her not to leave. Instead, I helped her carry her suitcase to her car and told her to take whatever time she needed. The confusion on her face was almost sad, like she kept waiting for the script to flip back to normal and couldn't understand why it wasn't happening. She sat in her car for a good 5 minutes before leaving, probably hoping I'd knock on the window. But I just went back inside and made dinner for myself. What she didn't know was that I genuinely meant it when I said okay to the divorce. I wasn't playing some elaborate game of chicken. I'd simply reached the point where I'd rather be alone than be in a one-sided marriage. If she wanted out, I wasn't going to fight to keep someone who'd made it clear they didn't value me. The peace I felt that first night alone in the apartment was telling. No anxiety, no sadness, just this quiet relief that I didn't have to perform for someone who wouldn't even notice. She stayed at Sophia's place for almost 2 weeks. In that entire time, I didn't call or text once. I figured if she wanted space, I'd give her actual space. Not the fake kind where you're still checking in. I went about my life, worked, went to the gym, met up with friends I hadn't seen in months because I'd always been too busy catering to her schedule. Honestly, I started remembering what it felt like to just exist without constantly monitoring someone else's mood. Apparently, my silence was driving her crazy. Sophia told me later that Olivia had been checking her phone obsessively, waiting for me to reach out, getting more anxious each day. She'd expected me to crumble without her, to realize I couldn't function, to come crawling back. Instead, she was sitting at her sister's, realizing that I was doing absolutely fine, maybe even better than fine. That reality was hitting her harder than anything I could have said. Sophia, to her credit, wasn't feeding into the victim narrative Olivia was trying to build. About a week in, Sophia asked her a simple question that changed everything. She said, "So, he's treating you exactly how you treated him, and you're upset about it. Do you not see the irony in that?" Olivia tried to explain how it was different, how her situation was justified, how I was being cruel. But Sophia wasn't buying it. She pointed out that Olivia had spent months ignoring my needs, dismissing my feelings, and explicitly telling me she had no obligation to care about my happiness. And now she was falling apart because I'd taken her at her word. That conversation apparently broke something open. Suddenly, Olivia was being forced to look at her own behavior from the outside, and she didn't like what she saw. Sophia asked her, when was the last time she'd done something nice for me without being asked? When was the last time she'd initiated intimacy, or planned a date, or even just asked about my day and actually listened? Olivia couldn't come up with examples, because there weren't any. And sitting with that realization was uncomfortable enough that she couldn't hide from it anymore. She came back home on a Thursday evening, no dramatic entrance, no demands. Just walked in quietly and found me reading on the couch. She sat down on the other end, didn't say anything for a few minutes, and then finally admitted she'd been wrong. Not about one specific thing, but wrong about everything. About how she'd been treating me, about what marriage was supposed to be, about thinking she could just take without giving and expect me to be okay with it forever. I didn't immediately accept the apology, didn't rush to comfort her or tell her it was all fine now. I just said that theories and realizations were great, but I needed to see actual change in her actions, not just words. The next few months were basically her proving she meant what she said. She started doing the small things again, making me coffee in the morning, asking about my work, actually engaging in conversations instead of staring at her phone. She'd initiate plans for us, suggest things we could do together, put actual thought into making me feel valued. The physical intimacy came back gradually, and for the first time in years, she was the one initiating it, showing me she actually wanted that connection instead of just tolerating my attempts. But here's the thing, I didn't trust it at first. I'd been burned too many times by temporary improvements that lasted a week before she slipped back into old patterns. So, I kept my emotional distance, stayed friendly but guarded, continued living somewhat independently, even as she tried to rebuild what we'd had. I needed to see consistency over time, not just a short burst of effort. About 2 months in, she had a stressful week at work and started slipping back into her old behavior, getting short, more time on her phone, annoyed when I tried to talk. The old me would have absorbed it, made excuses for her, kept trying harder. Instead, I immediately mirrored it back, became less available, stopped doing the extra things I'd started doing again. She noticed within 2 days. And instead of getting defensive or pretending nothing was wrong, she actually caught herself, apologized, and explained she'd been letting work stress affect how she treated me. That moment was huge. Not because she'd been perfect, but because she'd recognized her own backsliding without me having to point it out, and she'd corrected it immediately. It showed me she was actually paying attention to her behavior and cared about fixing it. We had a long conversation about 6 months after she came back, really laying out what we both needed from the marriage and what we were willing to give. I told her I wasn't interested in going back to being her servant, that I needed an actual partner who contributed equally. She agreed, said she understood now what she'd been doing wrong, how she'd taken me completely for granted and expected me to just accept being treated like hired help instead of a husband. We set some actual ground rules, stuff we probably should have talked about years ago, but had just assumed we were on the same page about. Things like making sure we both initiated quality time, checking in with each other about big purchases or decisions, actually communicating when something was bothering us instead of going cold. Basic partnership stuff that somehow we'd lost sight of. The relationship we have now is different from what we had before. And honestly, that's a good thing. The old version was me killing myself to make her happy while she gave nothing back, which was never sustainable. Now, we both put in effort. We both consider each other's needs. We both actually seem to enjoy being around each other. She tells me regularly that she's grateful I didn't just cave when she left. That if I'd gone back to the old pattern, she never would have learned anything and we'd have ended up divorced anyway. Looking back, the whole situation taught me something important about relationships and self-respect. When someone tells you that your happiness isn't their responsibility, believe them. And then act accordingly. Don't kill yourself trying to make someone care who's already told you they won't. Olivia needed to see what a marriage looked like when I stopped carrying everything on my own. Needed to feel the absence of all the things she'd been taking for granted before she could understand what she'd been doing wrong. Some people might say I was petty or immature, that I should have just communicated better from the start. But here's the thing, I tried that. I tried talking, tried explaining how I felt, tried asking for what I needed. She ignored all of it until I stopped talking and started showing her instead. Sometimes people don't hear words. They only understand actions. And sometimes you have to let someone experience the consequences of their behavior before they'll actually change it. We're still married, still working on things, still figuring out how to be better partners. It's not perfect, probably never will be, but it's real now in a way it wasn't before. She knows I won't tolerate being treated like I don't matter. And I know she's capable of being the partner I actually need. And honestly, that's worth more than the comfortable illusion we were living in before, where everything looked fine on the surface while I was drowning underneath. What would you have done in my position?